you know, in a gentlemanly way. We're almost at the halfway mark for this 10 episode long season of Lower Decks. I assume it's 10. That seems to be the trend lately. Short 10 episode seasons. Normally we'd be like still on season 1, maybe 2, but in this day and age we're on season 3, and also in this day and age we're almost halfway through. That's 4. Okay, room for growth. Are we at the point where we can begin to pass judgment on this season? Dare I say it, this season is a little bit worse than the previous one. This season is generally middling. The first one is generally bad. The second one gets better as it goes along. This one seems to be targeting the middle and failing a little bit more each episode. I won't say this is the worst episode so far, but for me, it ties with like the second one. I think I gave that one a 5. Not to spoil the review score or anything, but this episode just wasn't funny. It just wasn't interesting. And I had a hard time paying attention. Wasn't much to see, it wasn't much to hear. You know, it wasn't much to do out there. Not a lot of hands to kiss and babies to shake. This is Room for Growth. A stupid name. Given that a ship is introduced in this show called the Dove. Might have been cool to use that for your title. Like Dove Days, Dovecation, What's Up with Dove, Dude, Where's My Dove? Other insane names like that make no sense. Room for Growth. There you have it. A plot, B plot. Do they converge? Barely. We have an intro segment that barely has anything to do with the plot. It sets up what happens in the slightest of ways. You've seen the episode Masks of TNG, I hope. An episode I like. Not a lot of people like it. Some people think it's cringe, stupid, dumb, a waste of time, not funny. I think it's cool, interesting, and has great performances. You know, where they wear the masks? The episode's called Masks, and they do wear masks, but the ship is blank, and our characters end up having to wear masks, you see in TNG in this episode, Masks. At the beginning of this episode, our captain, Captain Freeman, is possessed by, what's it called? Makino? Minuki? Something like that. I believe it was Masaka in TNG. And she's wearing a mask and converting the Cerritos into some kind of temple. Is that what happened in TNG? Watch that episode and find out. No spoilers here, guys. But this leads to our engineering team being overworked, having to clean up all this crap from the ship. Removing stones, plants, vines, things like that. The ship was converted into a veritable cornucopia of ancient relics and living organisms in the form of plants and the like. It was interesting before, but we're using it for the setup here. And basically our engineering crew is tired. Okay, they've been working around the clock to clean up the Cerritos because they say they have an operation coming up with the Carlsbad. Keeping up with the Carlsbad again, just like last time. So, what are we going to do? Normally in Star Trek we go on shore leave. We have a place called Risa. We go down to Risa, and what happens on Risa tends to stay on Risa. Well, we've come up with something new here. There's a ship called the Dove. Okay? It's a pleasure ship that's meant to relieve stress. It's like a mobile spa, if you will. The Dove, contrary to what you might imagine, is an ugly ship. You're telling me there's a ship that is essentially a spa in itself, dedicated to healing your stressful ailments, making you relax, and all you could come up with was a villainous-looking ship that's simply been repainted earth tone, I could have come up with something really cool. Maybe it should have been shaped like a giant bathtub, an egg, a donut, something amusing, something to take the edge off. But back to the point, our engineering team has to take time off on their A-plot on this Dove ship, okay? They've been working too hard, and it's getting to the point where somebody might snap. Now, you'd be forgiven for being confused the way this episode plays out. You see, our engineers love to fix things. It turns out that repairing things relieves their stress. Okay? And this shtick goes on forever. Alright? Last episode, the shtick was, here's this rock, you take the rock, no, I take the rock, we smash it, and find out a secret. Check that review for the last episode if you want to know more. This episode, a shtick that overplays its hand, shows you its hand perhaps, because it doesn't really go anywhere, and overstays its welcome, is the fact that these engineers need to fix things to stay sane. So we're sitting on a pile of sand. We're supposed to be drawing things on the sand. I guess it's some kind of relaxation procedure, but it turns out we're drawing schematics. We're trying to cheat the system by breaking our sensors on our arms to detect our stress level. Why are we doing that? We learned a moment before, and this is why you should be confused, that our engineers were stressed out from doing all the work on the ship. But then 5 minutes later, fixing engineering problems relieves stress at a chemical level, according to these sensors. So what gives? This stays around way longer than you'd want it to. I got so bored, and it was even a little bit cringe. I even kind of said, oof, I'm glad I'm not watching this with someone. I'm glad I'm alone. I wouldn't have to explain this to anybody. Are engineers really this insufferable? Well, I guess so. They're always on some cockamamie scheme to come up with a way to do engineering when they're supposed to be relaxing. And they're supposed to be relaxing to relieve stress, but yet doing engineering things to relieve stress. But yet they were stressful on Cerritos. So, I think you've got some wires crossed, logically speaking. Anyway, this A-plot ends up with our engineers engineering a way to get rid of stress, thus eliminating the need for the Dove, crewed by our main character on the Dove. What's her name? Taz and Eldosian, I believe they're called. We've seen them in season 1, I believe, and we've seen them in the animated series. Arex? Very cool to see them come back. Interestingly, the last time we seen them on Lower Decks, they were doing the exact opposite, right? You remember the very creepy, scary, spooky ship that was supposed to take one or more of our characters to like a penal colony type thing, and the ship looked like absolute death. It was stress-inducing, and now we got the opposite. The Dove, crewed by the same species. Kind of a visual joke. Maybe you didn't pick up on it if you've seen it, but I certainly did, because I have an eye for ships. And an eye for when they're ugly. Dove's kind of ugly, to reiterate. We engineer a device that you walk into and it gets rid of stress. Imagine the implications. After a long day, instead of going to sleep, we just sit in this booth for a minute and we come out of this machine and boop, no more stress. Think of the implications. Taz has thought of that. Our Eldosian, I believe it's called, on the Dove, and has ordered the destruction of this machine because she's afraid of, losing her jorb. That machine's gonna done took her jorb. We don't see what happens later, but that's the end of our A-plot. Interesting, wasn't it? Yeah, it was interesting. Read my face. I really loved that A-plot. I really loved it. Right now I should turn around to the view screen and go like this. B-plot. It turns out that there's a lottery for getting a room on deck 1, Our characters erroneously believe it's 4 rooms on deck 1. Of course, it turns out to be 1 room, right? Not 4 rooms. They don't know that yet, but you know it. So you're spoiled. Not that it matters. I didn't think it was that interesting. It turns out it's our shift versus, what is it, Delta shift? Oh, those Delta shifters. Aren't they awful? Aren't they terrible? Look at our shift. We're great. We're better. Those idiots, don't worry about them. What happened to lower deck pride? What happened to all for one, one for all? Whatever. Let's look at this MSD and reveal that we need to go down one of the nacelle pylons attached to the saucer, through an access corridor on top of one of the nacelles, and then across the engineering pylon into the engineering section to access a room with a single panel where we can edit the lottery so that our characters win, so that we get that cushy room. You know, we're down here on the lower deck sleeping in bunks, even though I don't think there's that many people on the Cerritos. It's been a long-standing tradition in Star Trek for our ship sizes to be kind of confused. Famously, you know, the Enterprise Galaxy class can store way more than about 1,000 people. In fact, if you worked out the volume of the Enterprise from TNG, and you figured out that there'd be about 1,000 or so people on it, it would work out that you could go a whole day without even seeing anybody, if you were just a civilian on that ship or just some crewman. Ships tend to be ridiculously huge in Star Trek. So from whence comes the small bunks? Maybe the Cerritos is just that tiny. Apparently our characters think so because they really want to get into that, you know, special lottery, cool, cushy quarters, you know, the executive suite, as it were. Okay? And this plot involves Tendi, Boimler, and Mariner. By the way, our A plot, blink and you'll miss it, was a Rutherford plot. He disappears into the episode background again. He's on our A plot on the Dove. Meanwhile, our characters are really, you know, roughing it, trying to climb through the Jeffries tubes, different ducts, corridors, crawl spaces, ladders, you name it. Adventurous, yes, and we do go to various anomalous parts of the ship that are either there for comedy or intrigue. We walk through some kind of a runoff room for the hydroponics lab. We're below the hydroponics room, so we're down in some kind of swampy area. For those of you who don't know, starships will usually have an arboretum, and they will usually have pharmacopoeias in the medical area supplied by organic plant life. So we do have medical gardens. So this is not out of their own possibility to go down to a room dedicated to a swamp. Okay, fascinating ecology, good chemistry can lead to a lot of interesting medical discoveries if you study it. We walk through this area. Orions are immune to these chemicals, but Boimler and Mariner, being humans or not, they go on some psychedelic trip. Possibly the only interesting imagery in this episode. Hard to explain, but Boimler's head changes into some kind of sea urchin. Mariner's arm gets very stretchy. She thinks he's inside an egg. Thank goodness Tendi is there, and she's immune, because the oxygen levels are going down. They would have died had Tendi not been there. Thanks, Tendi. Oh wait, no one really takes time to thank Tendi for saving their lives, but being the viewers, maybe we should. Accidents here, bumps on the heads there. I have no idea how they survived, especially when Boimler got caught inside the deflector dish assembly when it turned on. Man. And the rotor started moving, and it started messing around with gravity, and he got flung to the inside of the cylinder. Well, good thing, again, Mariner and Tendi were there to make a rope out of their clothes to catch him. If there was one thing that should have killed Boimler so far in this show, it's that. They survive only to meet up with the Delta shift, is it? That they were trying to, trying to get one up on the entire episode. They just met up with them. We took this shortcut. We just found the people we were trying to race. It wasn't much of a shortcut, was it? Which way did they go? Anyway, in a repeat of the previous episode, we have a moment where we were enemies, but it turns out we're friends. We just needed a moment to bond. And they start exchanging pleasantries and stories, as you do, one of them being about Ransom, where apparently Ransom thought he was a caveman at some point and replicated a bunch of churros and fashioned some kind of idol figure out of them. And allegedly he keeps the same churro idol in his quarters. Still. And you can still smell the cinnamon, apparently. I guess churros involve cinnamon. I've never had a churro. And they ask, well, how can you still smell it? It must be so dried out by now. Oh. Ransom keeps it moisturized, you see. You know, in a gentlemanly way. Did we need to hear that? No. Did we need to hear an F-bomb in the first 3 minutes? No. This is starting to feel like early season 1, is it not? Are we Star Trek, or are we some kind of sleazeball comedy with no real intrinsic value and nothing to take home for ourselves later? You know, to warm up in the microwave, to eat, you know, to fill up on thematic goodness? You decide that one. Just as we think we've made friends with this other shift, bam, they ran out on us. Dang you Delta shifters, oh, blah, 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 you're so terrible. You just did all this to trick us, and they ran ahead. But yet our team got to this room anyway. This one little room with this panel to access the lottery. It smacks of that one room in Star Trek First Contact where all it's in it is a one window, and Picard had to crawl through a duct to get into it. Remember that? I think he showed it to Lily, that other character in First Contact, and he said, look out the window here, and he touched it, and there's a force field. And it's just one little room, and everyone was like, what the hell is this room for? This is like that. Cerritos has a tiny, very, very hard to access room with one panel, where apparently you can hack the quarters exchange lottery at. Who would have thunk it? I'll have to look a little bit closer at the Master Systems display next time, right? To see the little pointless lottery altering room that it's very hard to get to. Maybe they explained it away in some throwaway line of dialogue. I wasn't really paying that much attention. Forgive me, I'm only reviewing it. I'm only one man. I can't pay attention that closely. And there's a difference between explaining and explaining away. Complicated, but there is a difference. You see, our episode ends with our characters realizing that, oh wait, we can't break up the lower decks. We're a team. See, it was 4 rooms. It was 1 room, sorry. Not 4. Only one of us can get it. We're a team. Back at the mess hall later, the other team has accepted this room and have turned it into a party room where they're all living in it together. They've all just moved their beds together and are using it to have a cool time, party, fun world. While our characters are roughing it down at the lower decks in the bunks. Rutherford saying, why didn't you just take the room? It makes more sense to do it that way. We could have done that. You should have just got the room. We weren't thinking. We're stupid, confused, tired. We're the lower deckers. There's a reason why we're ensigns, maybe, you know? So our episode ends in the mess hall with Rutherford, Boimler, Mariner, Tendi together again, you know, our quadfecta, as it were. We don't really end back where we started. Our A plot and our B plot really don't affect each other. Thematically, it just feels totally empty. Like, what was I supposed to take from this episode? If you watched this, feel free to tell me what you took from it. What was the moral of the story? What was the lesson? What was the theme? At the very end, we get to see Ransom replicating some churros in an unmarked paper bag. And that's how we ended the episode. That's the tone we wanted to set for the end. That's the touchstone for the episode that we wanted you to take away, you know? The fact that Ransom has some kind of bizarre escapades with churros in his alone time. What does it mean? I don't know what it means. I didn't really like this episode. So to wrap it up, visually, the Dove is an ugly ship. There is ships in the background when we see the Dove, and they're kind of ugly too. Although, I think I saw an Andorian Kumari. I do like that ship. We got to see the inside of the Cerritos a lot, but there's not much of a difference between one Jeffries tube and another. We're just crawling around in ducts. We've seen that before. We go to that one interesting room underneath hydroponics, I guess, allegedly according to Tendi. That was kind of cool. And we did have the psychedelic freakout sequence. Visually, it's just middling. Could have done with some more ships. Could have done with maybe more in-depth detail as to where we were on the Cerritos over time. Maybe we could have shown them moving around on the map. You know, it would have been cool to see the inside of the nacelle. You know, we did see the inside of the deflector dish. That was cool. So, it's just to take it or leave it visually. Music. The theme song's still good. Nothing arousing. Nothing that really spoke to my soul while I was watching this episode. New Trek, the one thing they're good at is background music. And this episode proved that wrong because I couldn't really hear anything. Nothing interesting. No callbacks. Nothing to pull at my old heartstrings. You know, what are they, Purkinje fibers? Is that what you call them? I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I'm an engineer. Thematically, I don't know. I'm struggling. I've seen this 3 times. I can't figure out what this episode is about. Ask yourself this key question. What is the episode about? If you can't immediately answer it, there's a problem. You should be able to put what this episode is about in the grand scale of things on a post-it note. A little kid should be able to understand it. Oh, don't steal. Don't lie. Learn to rely on your friends. No man is an island. You know, things like that. What was in this episode relating to that? Really nothing. It is a comedy, so it's weighted appropriately. If this were an episode of quote-unquote normal Trek, it would be weighted more in favor of what kind of moral core you have. But seeing as this is a comedy, you know, you have to be aware of the genre you're interacting with, okay? So a comedy, not taking anything out of it, super memorable, it's not that big of a deal. But you know it is a big deal, whether or not you laughed. And I think this is the first episode of this season where I did not laugh once. Very damning, but very subjective. Everybody laughs at things different, you know. Some things are funny to you and they're not to me. If you watched it, did you find it funny? I didn't. Unfortunately, with all that being said, I'm going to have to go with a 4.5. A little bit worse than 5. I thought it was going to be tied with 5, but I've explained myself into a 4.5. I wouldn't really recommend it to anybody. You may think totally differently. If I was going to introduce someone to Lower Decks, this would be very, very low on the list to show them. It's not funny. It's not interesting. It's not cool. Nothing to see, nothing to hear, nothing to think about. It's room for growth. You know what? This episode had room to grow. Maybe the name is apt. This episode probably should have went back in the oven for a few more weeks. A few rewrites, you know? What do you guys think? I just told you what I think, and I'm not telling you anymore, but I'm Lieutenant Merrick, and I'll see you when next I see you.